The trash didn't just smell like rot, it smelled like my life. 10 minutes ago, I was a wife of 5 years. Now, I was standing barefoot on freezing concrete, watching my mother-in-law, Doris, point a manicured finger at a pile of overflowing garbage bags and laugh. "That is where you belong, Lillian," she sneered, the cold night air turning her breath into a ghostly mist. "Maybe a beggar will pick you up. God knows we're done with the leftovers." The door to the luxury apartment, the one I had scrubbed, polished, and paid for with my soul, slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked with a finality that echoed like a gunshot in the narrow alley. They thought they had finally discarded a poor girl they'd milked dry. They thought I was broken, penniless, and alone. What they didn't know was that while they were busy playing with my life, I was holding a secret that was about to incinerate theirs. I reached for my cracked phone, my fingers numb and blue, and dialed a number I hadn't touched in half a decade. 1 ring. 2. Then, a voice that sounded like thunder. "Miss Moore? Tell me you're ready to come home." I looked at the trash, then at the dark sky, and whispered, "Bring the fleet. It's time to burn it down." The cold didn't just bite, it gnawed. I am 72 years old, and at this age, your bones remember every winter. But the cold in that alley was different. It was the chill of betrayal. 5 years. That's how long I had spent trying to fit into the Moore family. I had been the perfect daughter-in-law to Doris, the invisible support for Vanessa, and the devoted wife to Caleb. I had walked away from the Hale family to my family, because I wanted to prove that love didn't need a legacy. I wanted a life that was earned, not inherited. My grandfather, Richard Hale, had stood at the gates of our estate and told me I was a fool. "They will see your kindness as a weakness, Lillian," he had warned. "And when the well runs dry, they will leave you in the dirt." I had proven him right. Inside that apartment, just an hour ago, the air had been thick with a calculated silence. Caleb didn't look at me. He looked at the divorce papers on the mahogany table, a table I had picked out. "Sign it, Lillian," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth that had once convinced me to leave everything behind. "No assets, no claims. You walk out with what you brought in." Which was nothing, Doris had chimed in from the doorway, her arms crossed. "Let's be honest, dear. You've been a charity project for 5 years. But Caleb is moving up. He needs a woman who can actually contribute to his status, not a placeholder." I looked at them, Caleb, the man I had supported through 3 failed business ventures, Doris, the woman whose medical bills I had quietly handled, and Vanessa, who was currently scrolling through a shopping app on her phone. They weren't an emotional family in crisis. They were a board of directors terminating an employee. With hands that refused to stop shaking, I signed. I didn't fight. Why would I? You cannot bargain for a heart that was never there. But as Doris led me to the service elevator and shoved me into the alley, mocking me with the trash, a fire started to smoke in the center of my chest. I sat on a discarded crate for 30 minutes. The wet cardboard soaked through my thin dress. Every few minutes, a window above would flicker, a neighbor peering out at the homeless woman in the alley before closing the blinds. Then, the darkness changed. It started as a low, rhythmic hum, a sound so expensive and controlled it felt out of place in this part of the city. Then, the lights hit. High-intensity LEDs flooded the alley, turning the grime into shimmering silver. A black Rolls-Royce Cullinan turned the corner, followed by 2 SUVs. They didn't just drive, they glided. The cars stopped 5 feet from the trash pile. Mr. Bennett, my grandfather's chief of security, stepped out. He didn't look at the trash. He didn't look at the apartment building. He looked only at me. He draped a cashmere coat over my shoulders, his expression a mask of professional fury. "The chairman is waiting, Miss Moore," he said softly. "The house is prepared." As I was ushered into the back seat, I saw a curtain twitch on the 3rd floor. I knew it was Doris. I wanted her to see. I wanted her to see the headlights. I wanted her to wonder why a woman she called a garbage was being rescued by a motorcade that cost more than her entire life's savings. The drive to the Hale estate was silent. Mr. Bennet knew better than to ask questions. He knew the look of a woman who had been hollowed out. When we passed through the iron gates and up the long, oak-lined driveway, the house felt like a giant waking up. My grandfather was standing in the foyer. He didn't use his cane. He stood straight, his eyes scanning me for damage. I was wrong, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Richard Hale stepped forward and took my hands. His grip was like iron. No, Lillian. You were generous. They were the ones who were wrong. They mistook the sun for a candle because you let them stand in your light. He led me into his study, where a fire was already roaring. On his desk lay a series of digital tablets and folders. Mr. Bennet worked while you were in transit, grandfather said, gesturing to the files. We didn't just look at their bank accounts. We looked at the plumbing of their lives. And Lillian, it's worse than you thought. To understand how I was betrayed, you have to understand the cycle of exploitation. Caleb and Doris didn't just treat me poorly, they used a sophisticated method to drain my resources while convincing me I was the one in debt. As I flipped through the pages, the room felt like it was spinning. When I married Caleb, my parents had set up a modest independence trust. It wasn't meant to make me a socialite, but it was enough to live on comfortably, roughly $15,000 a month in dividends. Caleb had told me the trust had failed during the market crash in our second year. He told me he was supporting us entirely on his salary. The records told a different story. Caleb hadn't just been taking the $15,000. He had falsified my signature to take out 3 massive loans against the trust's principal. He had used my money to fund Doris's lifestyle, Vanessa's European vacations, and a business that was nothing more than a front for his gambling debts. He didn't divorce me because he had moved up. He divorced me because he had finally hit the bottom of the trust fund. He had squeezed the orange dry, and now he was throwing away the peel. He thinks he's free, my grandfather said, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. He thinks he walked away with the loot and left the witness in the alley. He forgot that the Hale family doesn't just hold money. We hold the debt. Grandfather's strategy was surgical. We don't shout, Lillian. We don't post on social media. We simply remove the floorboards. Within 24 hours, the Hale legal team had purchased the primary mortgage on the Moore's luxury apartment. We didn't do it to be landlords, we did it to be the ones holding the eviction notice. Next, we looked at Caleb's business. It was a logistics firm that relied on 3 major contracts. It took Mr. Bennet exactly 4 hours to discover that those contracts were held by subsidiaries of our own holding companies. I sat in the study, watching as the calls were made. Cancel the Moore contract, Mr. Bennet said into the phone, his voice as calm as a summer lake. Violation of Ethics Clause 4B. No, don't offer a grace period. Cut it today. One by one, the lights of Caleb's world went out. He didn't know it was me. Not yet. He just knew that suddenly, the banks weren't answering his calls. The friends he had bought with my money were suddenly out of the office. I decided to do the interview Tanya Brooks had been asking for. Tanya was a journalist who specialized in white-collar crime and social parasites. We met in a quiet garden on the estate. I didn't talk about the alley. I didn't talk about the trash. I talked about the trust fund. I talked about the signature forgeries. I talked about the $1.2 million Caleb had diverted into offshore accounts while telling me we couldn't afford to fix the heating in our bedroom. I'm not here for a divorce settlement, I told the camera, my voice steady for the first time in years. I'm here to issue a warning. Some people believe that when they take everything from a person, they leave them with nothing. They forget that when you take everything, you also take away that person's fear. And a woman with nothing to lose and a legacy behind her is the most dangerous thing in this city. When the article hit the press the next morning, it was like an earthquake. The Moore family name went from social climbers to social pariahs in the time it took to refresh a browser. Desperation is a loud thing. 3 days after the article, the calls started. First from Caleb, begging, crying, claiming he was forced by his mother to sign the papers. I didn't answer. Then, Doris. She didn't beg. She screamed. She left a voicemail that was so vitriolic it would have made a sailor blush. She called me a snake. She said I had tricked them by hiding my wealth. You didn't want a wife, Doris, I said to the empty room as I listened to the recording. You wanted a bank. And the bank is closed. The final collapse happened on a Tuesday. The bank moved to seize the apartment. Since the Hale family owned the mortgage, we were the ones who sent the marshals. I asked to be there. I stood on the sidewalk in my Hale cashmere, watching as Doris and Caleb were led out. They didn't have suitcases, the court had frozen their assets, including the luxury goods bought with my trust. They had what they were wearing. Doris saw me. She tried to lung at me, but Mr. Bennett stepped in the way like a wall of granite. You ruined us, she shrieked. We gave you a family. We gave you a name. You gave me an alley, Doris, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And I'm just returning the favor. Look to your left. In the corner of the sidewalk, a pile of trash bags sat waiting for the morning pickup. That is where you belong, I said, echoing her words from that night. Maybe a beggar will pick you up. People think revenge is about the explosion. It isn't. It's about the peace that follows. Caleb is currently facing 15 counts of financial fraud and forgery. Without my support, he couldn't afford the lawyers he needed to fight the Hale legal machine. Vanessa is working an entry-level job in a different state, her influencer lifestyle a distant, bitter memory. I didn't keep the money we recovered. I used it to start the Lillian Hale Foundation. We provide forensic accountants and high-level legal aid to women, especially older women, who are being financially bled dry by their families. We find the invisible Lillian Moores and we give them their voices back. I still live at the estate. Every morning, I walk through the gardens with my grandfather. We don't talk about the Moores. We talk about the future. The weight in my chest is gone. I don't breathe with a hitch anymore. I learned the hardest lesson a person can learn, that endurance is not a virtue when you're enduring cruelty. If you are listening to this, and you feel like you are standing in that alley, if you feel like the people you love have turned you into garbage, hear me. The phone is in your hand. The light is coming. You are not the trash they threw away. You are the owner of the house they're trying to live in. Stop protecting the people who are destroying you. Step aside, and let the truth do the work. If this story stirred something inside you, don't scroll away in silence. Tap like, it tells us these stories deserve to be told. Subscribe to Vengeful Goddess for unforgettable tales of betrayal, resilience, and justice, stories you won't hear anywhere else. Turn on the bell icon, so the next story reaches you the moment it drops. Your support keeps these voices alive. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud, being heard is.